Well, essentially, what you're looking at is the collapse of the U.S. will to continue in Afghanistan. I think what people really miss in the whole conversation is that the United States has the power to effect anything. And the Afghans know that. So what's really interesting about living on the ground with people in a country like Afghanistan is that you get to see, when you take away the prism of, political spin and parties and, all the trappings that we have that obscure the truth from us in the US. These people, they teach you how to look at things in their most basic form.
Yes,
right?
that is so true.
That's what they do.
Yes.
And that's how they look at it. So they know, for example, the United States could bomb the Taliban supply lines right now. They're all coming from Pakistan. Everybody knows it. In fact, they're coming right through the Spin Boldak border crossing, one of the early ones that the Taliban took in the beginning of this offensive. They know that the Taliban doesn't exist without Pakistan. Right, and the Pakistani ISI. They know that the United States
ISI being the Pakistani Intelligence Service.
Right. And they know the United States funds the entire defense budget of the Pakistani military and intelligence services. So, for example, you could stop the money. You could stop the remittances of Pakistanis living in the United States. You could put sanctions. You could have visas. Every time you try to address this issue, the immediate response for 20 years of this war has been, you're advocating for war in Pakistan. No, you're not. What they know is there are many things the United States could do right now to change what has happened and is happening in Afghanistan, and they're not doing it.
Wait, can I just pause? I'm asking you a series of dumb questions. Why would the U.S. government be funding the Pakistani military and its intelligence services?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question, and really is one for the U.S. government. But what I can tell you is that when we hear about the bureaucracy that is on Capitol Hill, which are the bureaucrats who survive from administration to administration, this has been their policy. They have pushed through the Bush administration, through Clinton, through Obama, through Trump, and now to Biden, that because Pakistan is a nuclear nation, they are the only country in that region that actually matters. In fact, Joe Biden told Afghan's president, when it was Hamid Karzai was still in power, exactly that. On his listening tour after Obama won, he said to him, we don't care about Afghanistan. And we believe that Pakistan is the most important country in that region, and they always will be. And that message never, ever changed. And what you're seeing in Afghanistan today is the results of that policy, because the Taliban leadership is based in Pakistan. I mean,
yes.
The Quetta Shura, the Peshawar Shura, and the Miram Shah Shura. Those are the three leadership councils that cover the entire war for the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are not just in Pakistan, they are in the loving and warm embrace of the ISI, who recruits on their behalf, who orders Pakistanis in the tribal areas to give up their children to go and fight. They don't have a choice sometimes. And the United States has known this from day one. I mean, this is the staggering part to me, is that when you hear this debate, the intelligence agencies failed to see this. Seriously? The NSA is known as the crown jewel of intelligence collection in the world. There isn't a digital signature in existence that they don't collect and store and analyze and have algorithms and everything else to sort through. The idea that they missed this, you know what it takes to do an invasion like this? You have to stage forces. You have to plan. You have to have meetings. You have to have, weapons that are moving in.
I'm looking at our producers. Are you listening to this?
I mean, you have to have deals.
You're making... Keep going.
I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as believing that Ahmed Chalabi, some Iranian refugee in the U.S., persuaded the U.S. government to go to war. I mean, that's literally our narrative on the Iraq war. Seriously?
Yes.
I mean, we get so caught up in the weeds of this. What they want you to believe is that Afghanistan is complicated. Because if you complicate it, it's a tactic in information warfare called ambiguity increasing. So now we're all talking about the corruption and the this and the that, and there's all these complex parts. But at its heart, every single thing in the world, in your personal life, professionally, on the global stage, at its heart, it's very simple. It always comes down to one thing. One or two things. And in this case, in Afghanistan, this comes down to the fact that the United States wants this outcome. Whoever's in power right now, whoever's really pulling the strings, and I don't know that, they could do anything they want to change this, and they're not. And you see that on the southern border. You see that with critical race theory. You see that with the violations of big tech. You see it with, I mean, in 1,000 different ways, you see it all around you. And what you know from that.
You're telling the truth right now. I can just feel, I mean, you know, sometimes when you're listening to someone unveil an insight and you haven't tested it against anything, but you just know it's right, what you're saying is right.
It's very simple. You know, you can have a marriage and, you know, be thinking, should I stay with my wife, should I leave her? It can be very complicated. But in the end, it'll come down to one critical, defining, major thing. And everything else flows from that. And that's exactly where we're at in Afghanistan. The United States government could change this even today, and they don't do it. They don't use the leverage they have with Pakistan. They'll give you 5,000 reasons, but it doesn't matter. They don't tell you the national security threat posed by letting the cartels come across the southern border, do they? They only have a conversation about one thing, the humanitarian aspect. They never address that. Well, they're not addressing right now. You know what they're not addressing? All of the Al-Qaeda and other Islamic terrorist literature and communications that they're picking up that are celebrating this as a massive defeat. They're not talking about why the Taliban are dismantling advanced U.S. military equipment and sending it back over the border to Pakistan. And worse, they're not stopping it. Why? We are the NSA and the National Geospatial Agency, which controls the satellites, and all of these other arms of the United States government are watching this happen in real time. They are seeing advanced U.S. military equipment going over the border into Iran and going into Pakistan, and they're doing nothing to stop it. Why not? So what the Afghans will tell you, what they will tell you is that the United States chose this outcome.
What you're saying is so obviously true that I'm ashamed that it wasn't obvious to me until you said it, but it's clearly true. So why?
Well, that's the $64 million question, right? And that's the one where I, as a journalist, I'm always, I always say I'm not a prophet. And every time I hear someone on TV saying, this is what, Donald Trump is thinking, and this is why he did this or that, and, they were nowhere near him and have never talked to him, and they have no idea. So we do that all the time. But in terms of when you try to understand it, so as a journalist, I have to try to understand it, because this is going to shape and inform the questions I ask, the work that I do, and so on. So when I try to understand it, what I see is the American idea on trial. In fact, not just on trial, but convicted and guilty by our own hand. What did we do? We took this idea of freedom and everything that we live for and represent, and we said that this is a noble idea. And we brought that with us into Afghanistan. And we encouraged people to believe in it and to fight for it and to stand by our side and to bleed and die for it. And they have, in the hundreds of thousands since 9/11. And then we said, yeah, not so much. Your problem, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't show. What did Joe Biden say? They have to be willing to fight for it. What did the SecDef say, Lloyd Austin? You can't buy willpower. You can't buy the will to fight. Really? Close to 70, in fact, by now, probably more than 70,000 Afghan soldiers and policemen have died since 9/11, since 2001. Do you know how many that is? How many Afghan children have been targeted? In Kabul, just a few months ago, they hit a girls' school. 85 people were killed, most of them young girls. 85. And you're going to say these people don't have the will to fight? What you saw happen in Afghanistan had nothing to do with the will to fight. It had to do with this. Afghans have survived Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan and the British and the Russians and so on. Everybody loves to talk about the history, right? Graveyard of empires. What does that mean? It breeds a people who know what they have to do to survive. And when your number one ally and everyone with it, right? Because all the European countries too, not just the US, when they have bailed on you and your enemy is coming to you with bucket loads of cash, by the way, because that's what they're doing. They're buying their way through these villages and towns. And they have right next to them Pakistan, Iran, China, and Russia. You are not fighting just the guy that lives in your village or is from the south, are you? You are fighting for global powers who will do anything and who don't have to worry about Congress or the media or anything else. So they make deals to survive because that's what they do.
I'm fixated, though, on your meta-analysis that what we're watching happen is only happening because the U.S. government is allowing it to happen, and on some level must want it to happen, otherwise it wouldn't be happening. So if the Taliban are dismantling American weapon systems and bringing them back into Peshawar, into Pakistan, or wherever in Pakistan, like why in the world would we want something like that?
Well, that is a question for the Biden administration and for the SecDef and for the intelligence agencies. That is who that is a question for, because they are the ones watching it happen in real time. And they are the ones with the power to change it. And there's pictures of it, you know, whether it's Afghan troops driving their Humvees and everything across the border, whether it's the Taliban fighters. I just got sent an intel brief that came, you know, that is from a security company in Europe and showed Taliban fighters dismantling a helicopter. I mean, they know far more than I know. I'm a peon. Right, and so they have the power to change it. I don't have the power to change it. You don't have the power to change it. But we are supposed to use the accountability that is built into the First Amendment to hold people to account and get them to give us real answers. But you're not having that because why? Ambiguity increasing. We're arguing about whether or not the Afghans are corrupt, whether or not the Afghans, you know, look at them all, they all just gave up. No, not true. They didn't all just give up. Some did, some made deals ahead of time, but there are also other, and that's where it becomes more complex. There are other factors that came into play there that nobody is talking about on the world stage. It's like the virus. It becomes very simple in the end. We can argue and scream and everything about the virus. China builds bioweapons facilities. That's what they do. They don't create vaccines. They don't create treatments to save the world. They let their people die of the most basic diseases. So we know they have bioweapons facilities. That's all they are. So when we send research to the Wuhan lab, we know we're sending it to a bioweapons lab. I mean, it's always simple. The truth is always very simple. It may have, you know, complex, there may be complicated answers to it. And you may feel very, you may have a whole range of complex reactions to it and emotions and whatever else. But the truth itself is always very, very simple because it either is true or it isn't. You either knew from the beginning that the virus was man-made or you didn't, right? I mean, if you know how these things are engineered, they engineered in a host. So they're always come from a bat or some other host. They never come out of a lab. It's just that the bat is in the lab.
Right. Very good point. So the Taliban will be running Afghanistan now?
Oh, the United States has made this deal with the Taliban. Nobody asked why the U.S. made a deal with the Taliban. Why? They have been negotiating, the U.S. is negotiating with the Taliban without the Afghan government. They have not been at the talks. They have not been at the table.
So we don't, but I mean, the whole democracy, we're for democracy, we believe, I mean, that's just, no one even pretends anymore. We're not for democracy, period.
Who is we? Because if you look at the United States today, the narrative that is being reinforced on the world stage, every country in the world is watching. Every indigenous force or group or tribal community or whatever, every U.S. ally, every enemy is watching right now. And the message that we are sending is that the American idea is not worth fighting for. Why? Because it's based on a lie. Because at the moment, when the very people that we asked to fight for it are dying, they're being hunted down and slaughtered, what do you think is happening to those Afghan special operations soldiers or the government employees or the female, the women who went into government or have been on TV? What do you think is happening to them? Whether it happens quickly in full view of the world or whether the Taliban pursue a clandestine strategy and control the information coming out in order to get the what they've been promised by the U.S. The U.S. will recognize them as the legitimate government of Afghanistan and will take your tax dollars and mine and fund them with it. That's what they're going to get out of it. And that's one of the things that we know about, right? I mean, how much do we not know about? Two annexes to the deal.
So the U.S. government is funding the Taliban?
Well, considering we know how much money and support the Pakistanis have been given to the Taliban, and we've been funding the Pakistanis, we've always been funding the Taliban. As literally, while our troops were being killed and maimed on the battlefield, we were paying the people who put them in the ground. That's what we've been doing.
My head is imploding as you're speaking. It's hard to process all this information. But I'm a little fixated on this Pakistan question. Just one more on this.
Oh, you know why? Because it's the defining issue. So your instinct is absolutely right.
Yeah, I've been there, and I'm no expert on Pakistan, but it's a pretty rotten country in a lot of, not the people, but the government is always been, I would say, not worth funding. So do we have any idea who in the Congress would be pushing for this? I guess it's worth finding out.
There's lots of people in the Congress who are very pro-Pakistan. And they're on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans. The Pakistanis have a very robust lobbying apparatus in D.C., right? I mean, it's enormous, millions and millions of dollars. In fact, we probably pay for that too. It's just, you can't make it up, right?
No.
You literally cannot make it up. So that's one part of it, is that they have a strong lobbying, power and voice in Washington, D.C. It's bipartisan. And it's not hard to find. I mean, you can find these congressmen and senators who are pushing the Pakistani line, and generals. You know, you're going to love this story. So I did an interview for 60 Minutes with General Barno. We were blown up on the Afghan-Pakistani border in 23rd of November, I think it was 2002, and General Barno was in command. And what I always tried to do is, when I go, I lived in Afghanistan for a year, right, at that time. And I try to spend my time on the ground and in the field and living it before I sit down with the 3-star, who is a political appointee, who is in a position to answer the political questions. Because I think it's only fair you don't ask some, lieutenant or soldier in the field some question over which they have no authority or power to affect. So I used to save those questions, the policy questions, for the big guns who are qualified to answer them. Well, General Barno didn't want to answer. I mean, I just said the word Pakistan, and he didn't want to answer that. And it was so bizarre. And I obliterated him without even trying, honestly. And so when he was leaving the country, he asked to see me. And he wanted a second go because he felt that I don't know, I'm not good on football analogies, but he thought he was going up against a college football team, and he said he got basically, an NFL team. And so he wanted another interview. And I did that, went and spoke to him. And during that conversation, I will never forget him saying to me that since the Pashtuns are the majority tribe in Afghanistan, it is inevitable that they will rule that country. And do you know, when Benazir Bhutto was killed, I went to Pakistan immediately, and I got an exclusive interview with President Musharraf. And when I was filming that for 60 Minutes, I went to the Defense University with Musharraf. And who was in the front row at the National Defense University of Pakistan? Do you know the list of American generals that are fellows at that university? It was General Barno. And he wasn't the only one. There were others. I don't remember exactly, so I'm not going to say, but there were 3 or 4 American generals. So when you start to dig into these relationships and ties, I mean, this is really what they call the swamp, right? It is literally the definition of the swamp. And our policy, U.S. government policy on Pakistan is they're a nuclear nation, therefore we treat them differently. And we allow them to, I have said this for years, and I say it again because the thing I carry in my heart, go to Arlington Cemetery and find where the dead from this war are buried. Not from the Second World War, not from the previous wars. Go and see the bodies, the graves of Americans who died because of Pakistan's support for America's enemies. And I said this, I asked every commanding general this question. I asked General Schlosser, I asked General McNeil twice, because he went twice. I asked General Campbell when he was commanding general. I asked General Allen when he was commanding general. And by the time I got to General Allen, I was so fed up, because year after year after year of the war, when I was there talking to the generals, they would say, it's true, Pakistan needs to do better, but they're doing everything they can.
It needs to do better.
And by the time I got to General Allen, I said, you know what, General Allen? I said, every Every general who has sat in that chair and faced this question has given me the same answer, year after year after year. And the truth is that American soldiers in this country die because of Pakistan's support for America's enemies. And he looked at me and he said, "You just stated the truth." And what happened to General Allen shortly after that? That was the end of his military career. He was supposed to go and be the NATO ambassador, and that was all done. And then he was resurrected as the Obama's presidential envoy, along with Brett McGurk, to ISIS and beyond. So what they do, Tucker, is they get you in the dirt with their foot on your throat, like General Allen, General McChrystal, General Petraeus, and then they reach down and they offer you a hand. And our world is separated between those who take the hand and those who don't. You haven't taken the hand.
Never.
I didn't take the hand. And that's why you're not anointed. McChrystal took the hand. Look at him. He's the darling again, right?
What was... It's a lot to digest here. Do you feel that way? Yeah, I was asking my producer. What was Pakistan's position on the United States remaining in Afghanistan?
Well, Pakistan has had a very interesting role here. You know, I really do. I love Pakistan, and I've spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like it when I'm critical of them, but I'm just looking at the facts, right? And I'm really trying to understand the truth. And so the truth is that Pakistan made a deal with the U.S. from the very beginning. Because remember, when the U.S. went in 2001, we did not put any forces on the Afghan-Pakistani border, did we?
No.
No, we didn't. And Tommy Franks later said, well, we had, the Pakistanis said that they would take care of that.
Was anyone able to get across the border into... I mean, I'm just laughing because the whole point was to grab Osama bin Laden, who wound up.
Tucker, okay, so this is not something that I read about. This is something I actually did. I traced the steps of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban when they left Afghanistan and went back into Pakistan.
Yes.
I followed in their footsteps. I talked to the villagers. They were using foreign currency in the market. They showed me where they slept. I mean, not only did we not put anyone on the border, but again, U.S. military, U.S. intelligence watched these people. They were in groups. They gathered together. They came from different places along the front line. They gathered together, they stayed, they went in groups over the border into Pakistan. They stayed there, scattered in the villages and the tribal areas, until the ISI went village to village to village and found them and reconstituted the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and trained them and equipped them again and healed them and brought them back together. And then they began doing raids into Afghanistan and infiltrating Afghanistan again. And in 2005, 2006, they were fully reconstituted and destabilizing the whole of Afghanistan. And that is right when, you remember later we said, oh, we took our eye off Afghanistan because we went to Iraq and we shouldn't have done it. Well, one Afghan put it all together, and his name is Amrullah Saleh. And he was the vice president and has now assumed the role of president in the wake of Ashraf Ghani fleeing the country. And Amrullah Saleh put all this together in a document and drew and connected the dots. And I know this because Hank Crumpton at the CIA told me this and affirmed it for me. And I've seen this document and told me that Hank Crumpton was the head of counterterrorism for the agency. He also was one of the people that was very involved before 9/11. He was the guy at the agency that was sitting there when Osama bin Laden was at Tarnak Farms in Afghanistan and under Bill Clinton. And the CIA had a drone in the sky and could see bin Laden. You can see that old footage, right? It's online, bin Laden in black and white. You know what I'm talking about. And that was when they wanted to hit Osama bin Laden and take him out. And they asked Bill Clinton for permission, and he said no. Drones at that time were not armed, so you would have had to insert special operators and on the ground and take him out. And the Clinton administration wouldn't do it. And that was, of course, before 9/11. And so Hank Crumpton was very involved in all of this. And he became Condoleezza Rice's counterterrorism ambassador at the State Department. And he's one of the most respected people who's ever worked at the agency. And he was one of the people that confirmed to me that we figured out what the Taliban had done with Amrullah Saleh's help and the long-term strategy. He even laid out the phases of the insurgency and predicted what you're seeing now in that paper. Not precisely with every detail, but in this phase that the Taliban would move to take Afghanistan back. And so U.S. intelligence had this mapped out by one of their most significant allies. This man, Amrullah Saleh, was the conduit for all the intelligence on al-Qaeda and the Taliban in 2001. He's the guy they called to verify targets, to understand movements, and so on and so on and so on. These are not random people. These are not arbitrary people. This is the man who actually the U.S. anointed when as head of the Afghan intelligence services, in the new government after the fall of the Taliban. This is someone who the agency has had a close relationship with for a very long time and betrayed over and over and over again. So he's not new to this kind of betrayal, except right now, today, the betrayal that you're watching in real time is on a scale that is unimaginable, because when you see those people running to Kabul and swarming all over the tarmac and clinging to aircraft as they're taking off into the skies, that is abject terror.
By definition.
Is
there some reason that, so the U.S. government built the Afghan government, which is supposed to be representative, multi-ethnic, et cetera, is a model for the world. Is there some reason that the U.S. government didn't cut the Afghan government in on the negotiations with the Taliban?
Yes, because the U.S. government's ability to negotiate with the Taliban always rested on two things. By law, the U.S. government does not negotiate with terrorist organizations, right? So you had to separate the Taliban from al-Qaeda. That had to be done. But also, morally and ethically, to sell a deal and an exit to your people, you had to separate them from al-Qaeda, because al-Qaeda was responsible for 9/11, and no one in the U.S. is okay with, the President of the United States' administration sitting down with Osama bin Laden's people, right? So it was very, very important to do that. And so you saw this happen really in 2008, 2009, right after Obama was elected. The narrative that the Afghan government was corrupt, that Karzai was an unreliable partner, that everything we did was a waste of blood and treasure, that was very quickly infiltrated into every aspect of the information warfare machine. So the think tanks in DC started saying it, right? The journalists started reporting it. New York Times, mouthpiece for this narrative. You saw political figures saying it. And you saw, what did Obama do? One of his first acts was to appoint General Carl Eikenberry as his ambassador to Afghanistan. So Carl Eikenberry was despised by every person I ever knew in the Afghan government. And I was living there at the time, so I knew a lot of people. I used to walk in the mountains every Friday with Karzai's chief of staff and a number of his other ministers. And they were all Pashtun, and they all used to moan all the time about how they didn't have enough power. And I remember one Friday, because we had to drink tea after we walked in the mountains, I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, okay, I just got to say this. Like, you guys know you lost the war, right? I'm just saying, I realize that you think that you should have this and you should have that and you should have that, but you did lose the war. And you are, you have all these ministers, you're in the defense ministry. I mean, you're not in random ministries. You were given a lot of power. Our Afghan allies from the north, right? The Uzbeks and the Tajiks and all, they gave up a lot. I mean, from the very beginning.
What we called the Northern Alliance.
What the Pakistanis called the Northern Alliance.
There I am repeating ISI propaganda again.
We all do it. I do it too. But
what's the right term?
The United Front.
United Front.
But the Pakistanis wanted to reinforce the narrative that they only represent the tribes of the north and they don't represent the south and the Pashtuns. And therefore, they can only speak for those people. But we can speak for the majority of Afghanistan. So built into all of these false narratives are very well-planned, well-orchestrated, successful, manipulative political narratives that serve their agenda. And we all do it. It's just like the invasion of Afghanistan. No, we didn't invade. We had several hundred troops on the ground. The Afghans fought and died, and they were the Afghans of the United Front / Northern Alliance. The Afghans even gave up on that. They just gave up on it because every journalist in America and in Europe and everything, they just go with the Pakistani narrative, partly because the Pakistanis generally speak perfect English.
Well, that's exactly right.
And some Afghan in a dish dasher who only speaks Farsi, this guy, he's got no credibility with the average American journalist, right? Who don't bother a lot of the time to figure out who they really are. And so it's an easy sell for the Pakistanis. And the Afghans, being a poor, country mired in war, they don't have a big lobbying effort in Washington. So, and where is most of the reporting done? From Washington.
Right.
I mean, most of these reporters.
Or Islamabad, for that matter.
Or Islamabad, or places
Marriott
like that.
in Islamabad, that's where a lot of it was.
And and I spent my fair share of time in the Marriott in
too.
Islamabad. I was kind of grateful to get a bed and a hot shower after months in Afghanistan.
It's a good hotel. They blew it up.
They did.
Yeah.
They did.
They had the only bar in Islamabad, I remember that.
For having us there, and a nightclub.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So, going forward, what happens?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and a very sad one. So what's really the most interesting to me about it is, if Russia criticizes America or China does, everybody can look at that. We evaluate motive when we evaluate credibility, right? And decide what we believe and what we don't. So their motive is obvious. What is less obvious here is what is the motive? What would be the motive of the United States to allow something like this, something as catastrophic as this?
To install the Taliban effectively. I mean,
and also to take the heat, right, in the media, because a lot of Americans listening to this will say, oh, well, that's ridiculous. What is she talking about? That's crazy. This is going to hurt. I hear these pundits. This is going to hurt Biden. This is his legacy, and this is a smear on his presidency, and so on and so on. Biden is very obviously has cognitive issues.
Yes.
And is being used.
Of course.
By other people.
Yes.
So they really don't care what happens to Biden, do they? I mean, if they cared about Biden, they wouldn't put him in that position.
The clock is ticking,
right.
on Biden.
So Biden is expendable. And it doesn't mean that every person in the U.S. government at every level knows precisely what they're doing. The way information warfare works is you have your people at the bottom who are your unwits. They have no idea what's going on. Then you have your people, in the middle level layers who are your half-wits. And they think they know what's going on, but they really don't. And then you have your full wits. And that's within every cell of an information operation. So even your full wits, they may know why they're there and what they're doing, but they may not really know what they're doing because they can be a piece in a bigger puzzle. So your people like John Kirby and Jen Psaki, who are out there, who are obviously lying and uncomfortable because it's so obvious.
Yes.
They can be half-wits, right?
Of course, and they are.
And they are.
Yeah.
But there are people behind them and people behind them who are not. They really know what they're doing. And their narrative, the narrative today that the American idea is inherently evil and a lie and is built not on good, but on bad, that's their narrative, isn't it? In this country today. It's the same narrative. And I don't know, I can't tell you this person, that person, or anything like that. I can only tell you that there isn't anyone in their right mind that would stand by the United States after what they've seen. Yeah. Right? So if you need people to fight for you and to fight for the American idea, you just lost your allies worldwide. Why would anybody do it? There's that old saying, with friends like that, who needs enemies? These old sayings have survived from the beginning of time because they're true. They're very, very true. And people don't forget. Why would the Iraqis fight with us against ISIS? Why would any Afghan, and not just fight for us, why would they believe that America represents anything that is morally true and just and valuable? Because we just showed them all that it's not. When it doesn't suit us anymore, we're going to let Afghan girls be hunted down. We're going to let them be imprisoned in their homes. We're going to let women be stoned to death, right? We're going to let all those people. I just got pictures of 15 government employees in Ghazni province who surrendered, turned themselves over to the Taliban, and all of them executed. We took soldiers, we took people in those countries, and we built them into some of the most accomplished warriors on earth, and we sent them into battle time and time and time again, thousands of operations. And then we said, when it was time, when it suited us, we said, we know you're going to be hunted down and killed, and so will your family, and too bad. That's on you. You should have done this and you should have done that. We can't be there forever. Americans really don't understand what we've done. I mean, we have said by our own hand that we don't keep our word. And I was there when I heard those promises being made. American diplomats promised Afghans, we'll never do this to you again, like we did after the Soviets were defeated, when you needed help. And they promised them, we will be with you forever. Our soldiers went into those villages and said those same words. They sat and had tea with tribal elders. And they asked people, give us your sons and daughters to be our interpreters. Give us your sons and daughters to train and be our eyes and ears on the ground, to work for our intelligence agencies. All of those people have been abandoned, every single last one. And this will be the gift that never stops giving, because every time one of them dies, every time a journalist goes and does a story about how terrible life is for the women in Afghanistan, it will reinforce the idea. It will empower America's enemies and weaken us globally.
I mean, what's China's view of this?
They walk hand in hand with Pakistan. They have already recognized the Taliban because they received an official delegation
already?
of the Taliban. Oh, yeah. This is a couple of weeks ago. There was an official visit of the Chinese government and the Taliban. I believe it was in China. You can see the pictures. I mean, they took official photos standing with Chinese officials. The Russians have already put out a statement. I mean, there's intelligence reports that the Russians have already met with several delegations of the Taliban, but they have put out a public statement that they are ready to recognize the Islamic Emirate. The Iranians have been meeting with the Taliban. And so China has been supplying weapons to the Taliban and to Pakistan. And it's very obvious, China's been fighting the doctrine of unrestricted warfare against the United States. They are very much invested in the strategy to undermine the U.S. from within and on every front.
How's it going?
Extremely well.
I've noticed.
They're winning.
How's their bioweapons program? Is it effective?
Very.
It is.
Yes, along with their drug program.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
I don't know why I'm laughing. This is like the saddest thing. This is one of the saddest conversations I've had in a long time, but it's so interesting.
Imagine how my children feel.
No, I can't even imagine.
Hearing this at home.
Do they?
Yes, of course. Because you can't, I mean, this affects every aspect of our lives. My children were taught at school that Karl Marx is a famous German philosopher in a class about different economic systems. That's a state education curriculum in Texas.
How long have you been in the U.S.?
I've been living in the U.S. since 2008, and I worked for CBS and 60 Minutes from 2001 as full-time, and I worked freelance for them before, so I was back and forth. So, pretty much most of my adult life.
Where did you grow up?
South Africa.
I know, but where?
Oh, I grew up in the city of Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. And, those things I learned growing up there really put me in a good position later, because I would hear Americans saying, soldiers would say, like, I don't understand, like, this person is supposed to be helping their country, but they're doing this for their tribe. And are they loyal to their tribe or their country? And I would say, both.
Yeah.
It doesn't conflict for them. It's very simple, but that's not part of the American psyche, right? And when we first sent soldiers into these wars, they didn't even know how to say Salam Alaikum, which is, the standard greeting. I know, because I was at Bagram Air Base when they landed, hiding in the general's car behind the one-way glass, because he was receiving the CIA on the tarmac, and he said, don't tell them you're here. And I stay in my car, and I would, when he would let me out, once the conventional soldiers were on the ground, I would talk to them. And they would say, "What did you say, ma'am?" I said, "Well, salam alaikum." It's pretty much the first word you need to learn if you're going to be here for a while.
Yeah, that's for sure.
20 years
So let me
later.
ask you, just theoretically, you're the United States. There's a lot of political. It's a democracy, so you have to ultimately, at least theoretically, you have to bow to the will of the population. They want to withdraw from Afghanistan after 20 years. The previous administration has said we're doing it. We're doing it. Okay, so that's what we're doing. You're Joe Biden. Your job is to get us out of Afghanistan. How would you do it better than the way they did it?
I wouldn't make a deal with the enemy, first of all, because you don't need the permission of the Taliban to withdraw from your bases, do you?
No, you don't. Good point, Lara Logan.
Why'd you make a deal with the Taliban?
That's a great question.
Why? Peace deal? Where's the peace? What peace are you talking about? Don't attack my soldiers, but keep killing Afghans? The people that we've fought alongside? That's the deal that we made. You realize that, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, we gave them the timeline. We gave them the plan. So they knew exactly where they had to be and when. Think about that. Afghan soldiers woke up in Bagram Air Base and found the Americans disappeared in the middle of the night. They didn't know. So we didn't tell our allies as much as we told our enemies. That's what we did. So Joe Biden didn't have to do that. And, one of the things I need to address one of the biggest information warfare propaganda talking points, which is that if that I'm sitting here saying you have to be in Afghanistan for the rest of your life. Actually, in retrospect, what I've learned is that probably the smartest thing the United States could have done was to decimate Al-Qaeda and the Taliban the way they did, and then give it to the Afghans.
Of course.
And say, it's yours. We will support you. What do you need?
Right.
Oh, you need intelligence assets. You need this.
Sure,
you need that.
absolutely.
And by the way,
we've got an embassy for that. Swing by if you need help.
And we also have, we have military missions. We have military forces that work with our allies all over the world. We have counterterrorism capabilities and assets. We can do that. There's a lot we can offer. In fact, Joe Biden could have left the counterterrorism force exactly like that on the ground. He was asked to do that, and his administration said no. They refused. He didn't have to take the U.S. air support away from the Afghan Special Operations troops. That is something he should not have done. You can phase that out, but why do you have to take everything away at the same time? Why did you create a timeline of withdrawal that had an arbitrary timeline, by the way, and make that the end date September 11th? I just want to say that. Why did the Biden administration make September 11th, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the final date for the withdrawal to be complete?
So here are the takeaways of our conversation so far, and you've given us a lot, and I'm looking forward to watching this actually because I want to think more about it. But we effectively installed the Taliban. We didn't have to. We did.
Yeah.
We funded the Taliban and have been for the last 20 years through our putative ally, Pakistan.
This is their proxy war. It's actually not a war in Afghanistan.
That's exactly
it's Pakistan's proxy war.
I remember when I got right after 9/11 when I went over there, which was even before the bombing of Afghanistan, there was still the phones in Islamabad, you didn't need to dial an area code to get to Kandahar.
Yeah.
Because that's how direct the connection was. Afghanistan wasn't a real country. It was a satellite of Pakistan. And I don't know why we've forgotten that. But that hasn't really changed, which is a point that I'm glad you're making.
For the Pakistanis, it hasn't changed. But for the Afghans, it has. They're very proud of their country.
I bet they are, and they should be. So we did this. We didn't need to negotiate with the Taliban on the way out. We didn't need to ask the permission of the Taliban to close down Bagram Air Force Base, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, I just want to restate this because I feel like I've been repeating unthinkingly these propaganda lines.
We didn't have to take away the maintenance contractors that kept the Afghan Air Force in the skies. Why did we do that? You could have left the contractors there on a contract. Why did you take all of the maintenance capability of the entire Afghan Air Force away overnight and put it in the Gulf, in neighboring states, and said, you can go on Zoom? Really? I mean, why? Why would you do that? And then you put all this money and time into training the best soldiers Afghanistan has, who are a highly specialized force that relies on mobility, and then you took their mobility away. And then you have all these shows talking about how the Afghan forces collapsed 20 years and all this money we put into them and look how useless they are. They're not useless. If you put a unit of Delta force on the ground there and they were out of ammo with no air supply, what do you think? And surrounded, what would happen to them? They would all be slaughtered. That's exactly what would happen.
Right.
It's not a measure of their capability. So, you can ask other questions about, okay, why after 20 years are we doing their maintenance through contractors and they're not doing it? Well, first of all, they did all the training in English. And most of the Afghans didn't speak English. So it took years for them to learn how to speak English, just to be an Air Force mechanic. So that's where you get the complicated little details that build the reality of the picture that you're looking at. But without those details, it allows the propagandists to say whatever they want.
So, I mean, speaking of propaganda, and you always hate to think you're implicated yourself in the propaganda machine, but we all are to some extent.
We are.
I hate discovering that. But I've been using the phrase the fall of Kabul. Kabul didn't really fall. I mean, this was something that happened because we orchestrated it. The U.S. government, not we, but the U.S. government orchestrated this.
Take a look at the letter that Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrote to President Ghani and his government. Take a look at the letter that Mike Pompeo wrote to President Ghani and his government. I can guarantee you that in your entire life, you have never seen a diplomatic communique like that. We spoke to the Afghan government like they were errant, naughty little children who wouldn't do what we wanted. That's why we negotiated without them, because they would not participate in the lie of the United States that the Taliban is not ideologically identical to Al-Qaeda, that they are not one. They are exactly the same. You know what the Vice President Amrullah Saleh will tell you, because he ran the intelligence agencies? When we catch them, when we interrogate our prisoners, they may be, ISIS today. 2 months ago, they were Al-Qaeda. And 2 years ago, they were Taliban. Like he said...
Same people.
Yes. He said it's the difference between drinking Pepsi or Coke. Can you tell? Is it still soda? That's what it is. And if you look at the United States, we began this narrative. At the same time, we began the narrative that the Afghans were corrupt, which General Eikenberry, the ambassador at the time, leaked, right? It was his letter to Washington that got leaked to the papers. That's the first sign that you're being set up, by the way. And it said Karzai is an unreliable partner and he's corrupt and the Afghans are corrupt. From that day forward, the narrative was the Afghans, it's not worth the blood and treasure. We've done nothing. We've accomplished nothing. And at the same time, the narrative coming from the CIA and all the intelligence agencies and the defense chiefs, except for a few notable exceptions like General Michael Flynn, was the Taliban, these are the good Taliban. There's difference. There's bad Taliban and good Taliban. And we need to negotiate with the good Taliban. They're different, right? New Taliban are different to the old Taliban. Oh, except, are they really? Look at Afghanistan today. That was a lie. We're seeing it everywhere, right? All across Afghanistan. They're not any different. They're not, they're not the new fuzzy Republic of Afghanistan. They are the Islamic Emirate. And so what was the other part of that lie that was so critical? That ideologically, the Taliban did not, all they wanted was their country back from the foreign invaders. And they don't share anything with Al-Qaeda. And that's why it was so important to drop the precondition that we had from day one, that the Taliban renounce Al-Qaeda publicly. What were the 4 preconditions under Bush? Precondition for peace talks: that you renounce Al-Qaeda publicly, that you embrace the Afghan constitution. Like, just start there. Have either of those 2 things happened?
By definition, no.
So why did we sit down with the Taliban? We dropped our own preconditions. Why? Because we were told that Al-Qaeda is decimated and on the run. You remember that? Al-Qaeda is decimated. Those are quotes. They go back to George Tenet. I mean, you can find a million people, including journalists and think tanks and pundits, who all pushed this line, core Al-Qaeda. We created core Al-Qaeda. It doesn't exist in Al-Qaeda's terminology. They don't define themselves that way, right? And what did Al-Qaeda do? They used 9/11 to establish their ideology as the base. Al-Qaeda translated from Arabic, literally means the base. What is it the base of? The ideological base of the global jihad to install an Islamic rule over the world. But their version of it, right? Their very distorted, brutal, extreme version of it. And so they function like a clandestine intelligence organization. And what they've done, their strategy since 9/11, has been to export that ideology all over the world. And they have been massively successful, because if you go into a village in Nigeria, or in Mali, in Timbuktu, or in the Philippines where Abu Sayyaf is fighting, or in Chechnya, right, where the Chechens are fighting, or in London, or in Iraq, or Syria, or,
Michigan.
Pick a place.
Yeah.
It's the same ideology, is it not?
Yeah,
it's identical.
My prediction is the Taliban will hire McKinsey or some other consulting firm that will
hire?
Will hire. You're too fast for me.
Come on, Tucker.
That's such a good point.
Come on.
And Frank Luntz, their new consultant, will say to them, this is working great. You got to change the name. Taliban, too much baggage. I bet you $20 in the next year, they won't be calling themselves the Taliban. Because they won't qualify for U.S. aid packages if they do that.
Do you know who... So Nigeria has a Boko Haram, ISIS in West Africa problem, and their Muslim president, you know who he hired?
Who?
For his campaign? David Axelrod.
I don't know why I'm laughing. Lara Logan, I hope you come back often. That was an amazing conversation. I did not expect to learn as much as I did, and I'm grateful. And I think our viewers will be too. Thank you
I'm
very
grateful
much.
too. Thank you.